right. Okay, so fast forwarding a little bit, back during the civil rights era, what were you doing during that time in your life, and were you involved at all?
Yes, I guess I was heavily involved in the civil rights. One of the reasons that I decided to become a minister and go to seminary was I wanted to have some influence in that particular social movement. There was civil rights were not all that popular in those days, and I suppose I had a feeling of wanting to do something for the underdog side of the issue.
What year was this that you went to seminary?
I first got really involved right after started to seminary in Chicago, McCormick Seminary in Chicago, and in the summer of 1962 and 1963, I worked with a fellow minister from Decatur, Illinois, named Jay Logan. There's a saint of a guy, and he was active in the civil rights movement in Illinois. And then when the civil rights really became active in late '62 and '63, the Council of Churches decided to sponsor some voter registration projects in Mississippi, and chose as the site, demonstration site, Forest County, Mississippi. The county seat is Hattiesburg. And in Forest County, there were something like 30,000 blacks and maybe 25,000 whites, but only 3 registered voters were black out of the whole county. The county registrar was under an injunction from the Circuit Court of New Orleans to stop discriminating. He would require a person who wanted to register to vote, if they were white, all they had to do was just sign a form. If they were black, they had to recite certain sections of the state constitution verbatim. And if they passed that test, then they had to interpret that, which left it an entirely subjective meaning to him. So he had been successful in keeping all the blacks not registered. His name was Theron Lynn, and he's most famous now for being the subject of a lot of impromptu songs that the civil rights workers sang. Anyway, back to Hattiesburg. I got in the summer of 1963 with Jay Logan and some other people. We went for 2 weeks for the voter registration project, and the idea was people around the country could volunteer 2 weeks to come and knock on doors and persuade people to register. So we did that, and a lot of interesting experiences there. I got to see the inside of the Forest County Jail. We had a picket line going around the courthouse, encouraging people to register. And one morning I remember walking around, and here comes this young woman in a fluffy yellow dress with hoops and everything, just a real vision, blonde hair, a vision of a Southern belle, loveliness, beauty queen. She gets right next to me, and as I'm walking along with this sign, says, "Why don't you motherfuckers go home?" Well, I was kind of startled, you know. I didn't know women talk like that. Anyway, so that was kind of interesting. And we got arrested a day or two later. The state legislature passed a law that was later deemed unconstitutional, that you couldn't picket state property. They passed the law at 12:01 and 100 miles away, and at 12:02 we were arrested, taken to jail. So I had some explaining to do to the little congregation in Homer, Illinois. They wanted to know, what in the world am I doing down there? So anyway, to answer your question, I wanted to try to exert some influence, and the Presbyterian Church was, at that time, had quite a bit of both ministers and lay people who wanted to be involved actively
Mm-hmm.
in civil rights.
Did you say you were also in the South a little bit during that time, like with the buses or such, you know, for the
I
civil
never did
rights?
go on any of the bus rides. Those were mostly conceived in the East.
Okay.
So, but the two voter registration projects, and then went to the March on Washington in 1963.
Mm-hmm.
March on Washington for Jobs and Justice.
Was that the Million Man March? Where?
Yeah, that's the August 1963, when most noted for when Martin Luther King Jr. made his famous "I Have a Dream" speech.
Huh.
It was a hot, muggy day, but it was a very memorable day. 250 or 60,000 people crowded on the mall in Washington, and so that was quite a day. The following year, I did a number of fair housing projects in Kansas City, and Wichita.
Mm-hmm. Huh. And so, when did you decide to move out of the ministry and back to kind of?
Well,
Presbyterian
I guess
Church?
it was a combination of things. Wichita, Kansas is it's a different town. It's a big history as a cow town in the Wild West.
Mm-hmm.
But in the '60s, it was a town that was in the throes of its own civil rights turmoil. The John Birch Society was very active in Wichita.
What is that?
The John Birch Society is a very, very far right fascist type of group that most famous for calling Eisenhower a communist and seeing communists behind every Bush in America. They had a bookstore. They were very active trying to take over school curriculums. So I got involved in the civil rights and other things, and at the same time had some personal problems, marital problems, and I was appalled at some of the behavior of other Presbyterian ministers. It seemed to me a lot of petty quarrels and bickering and hypocrisy. So there was a divorce, which I later regretted. I think it was a mistake, but at any rate at that time. So with the John Birch Society, me on their number one list, I decided it was time to look for something else.
Mm-hmm. What did you end up doing after that?
Well, I worked for a while in as a construction industry labor negotiator
Okay.
with the IBEW, International Electrical Workers. And then some friends of mine that I'd met in the voter registration project looked me up and told me about a group that was forming. Sergeant Shriver was forming a volunteer group to help young men coming out of the Job Corps training. And they were looking for people to head up this agency and train volunteers to help young men coming out. So I applied for that, got hired, and moved to Washington, D.C. as director of a group called JACS, Joint Action and Community Service.
Okay.
So I did that for 3 years.
Okay. Let's see here. Check this again. Alright. It's smart with these things.
Are we off?